The rhythmic hum of my sewing machine filled the air as I, Kennedy Blake, meticulously stitched a hem on Mrs. Goldstein's curtains. Just another mundane Tuesday in my quaint little shop, nestled in the heart of Fort Lauderdale. The Florida sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the bolts of fabric lining the walls. I wiped a bead of sweat from my brow, my graying blonde hair escaping its messy bun. Suddenly, the bell above the door jingled frantically, and a whirlwind of energy burst into my sanctuary. "Oh my God, please tell me you can help me." A young woman with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes stood before me, clutching a glittery mess of fabric to her chest. I blinked, taken aback by her sudden appearance. Well, that depends on what you need, dear." She thrust the sparkly bundle towards me. "This is supposed to be my costume for tonight's performance, but the zipper's busted, and there's a tear right across the ass. I mean posterior," she corrected herself, a blush creeping across her freckled cheeks. I couldn't help but chuckle as I took the garment from her. "Let's see what we can do. I'm Kennedy, by the way." "Autumn," she replied, relief evident in her voice. "Autumn Rivers. You're a lifesaver, Kennedy." As I examined the damage, I couldn't help but notice Autumn's lithe figure. She was all lean muscle and graceful lines, no doubt from years of dance training. I caught myself staring and quickly averted my gaze, feeling a strange flutter in my chest. "This shouldn't take too long," I assured her, threading my needle. "So, what kind of performance is this for?" Autumn's eyes lit up. "It's a contemporary dance piece about the awakening of desire. Pretty edgy stuff." She winked, and I felt my cheeks grow warm. As I worked on her costume, Autumn chatted away, filling my usually quiet shop with tales of her life as a dancer. I found myself captivated by her enthusiasm, her zest for life so different from my own reserved nature. My hands moved deftly over the fabric, acutely aware of how revealing the costume was. I tried to maintain my professionalism, but I couldn't help imagining how it would cling to Autumn's curves. "There," I said finally, holding up the repaired costume. "Good as new." Autumn squealed with delight and, without warning, threw her arms around me. I stiffened, unused to such displays of affection, but found myself melting into her embrace. She smelled like jasmine and something uniquely her. "You're amazing, Kennedy." She pulled back, her eyes sparkling. "Hey, why don't you come see the show tonight? I can get you a ticket." I hesitated, my mind racing with excuses. I was too old for nightclubs, too set in my ways. But something in Autumn's hopeful expression made me nod. "I'd love to," I heard myself say. Autumn's smile could have lit up the entire city. She scribbled down the details on a scrap of paper, her fingers brushing mine as she handed it over. A jolt of electricity seemed to pass between us, and I quickly pulled my hand away. "See you tonight," Autumn called as she dashed out, leaving me standing in the middle of my shop, clutching the paper and wondering what I'd just gotten myself into. As the day wore on, I found myself glancing at the clock more frequently, a mix of anticipation and nervousness building in my stomach. When closing time finally came, I stood before my mirror, frowning at my reflection. I'd changed outfits 3 times already, feeling ridiculous for putting so much thought into it. "Get a grip, Kennedy," I muttered to myself. "It's just a dance performance." But as I locked up the shop and headed towards the venue, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was going to change everything. The warm night air caressed my skin, carrying the promise of new beginnings. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. All because of a chance encounter with a vibrant young dancer. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would unravel everything I thought I knew about myself, love, and desire. The pulsing beat of electronic music washed over me as I stepped into the dimly lit club. I felt out of place among the sea of 20-somethings, their bodies writhing to the rhythm. The bartender raised an eyebrow as I ordered a glass of white wine, probably wondering what a middle-aged woman was doing in this den of youth and vitality. I sipped my drink nervously, scanning the crowd for a glimpse of Autumn's fiery red hair. Suddenly the lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the audience. A single spotlight illuminated the stage, and there she was. Autumn moved like liquid fire, her body twisting and undulating in ways I didn't think possible. The costume I'd repaired clung to her curves, leaving little to the imagination. I found myself mesmerized by the play of muscles beneath her skin, the arch of her back, the extension of her legs. As she danced, her eyes locked with mine, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only 2 people in the room. Heat rose to my cheeks, and I took a large gulp of wine to steady myself. What was happening to me? The performance ended all too soon, leaving me breathless and confused. As the crowd erupted in applause, I slipped towards the exit, overwhelmed by emotions I couldn't name. But before I could escape, a warm hand caught my wrist. "Kennedy, you came." Autumn's face was flushed with exertion, her green eyes sparkling with excitement. "What did you think?" I stumbled over my words, trying to form a coherent thought. "It was incredible. You were incredible." Her smile widened and she tugged me towards the bar. "Come on, let me buy you a drink. The after-party's just getting started." Before I knew it, I was perched on a bar stool next to Autumn, nursing another glass of wine as she regaled me with stories from her dance career. As the alcohol loosened my tongue, I found myself opening up about my own life, my failed marriage, my dreams of designing haute couture that I'd long since abandoned. "It's never too late to chase your dreams, Kennedy," Autumn said softly, her hand resting on my knee. The touch sent sparks through my body, and I fought the urge to lean into her. "Easy for you to say," I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "You're young, beautiful, talented. And you're not?" Autumn's gaze was intense, searching. "Kennedy, you're gorgeous, and the way your hands move when you sew, it's like watching art in motion." I felt myself blushing furiously, unused to such open admiration. "Autumn, She leaned in closer, her lips mere inches from mine. I could smell the sweetness of her breath, feel the heat radiating from her body. My heart hammered in my chest as I found myself drawn towards her, like a moth to a flame. Just as our lips were about to meet, a group of rowdy dancers bumped into us, shattering the moment. I jerked back, reality crashing down around me. What was I thinking? I was old enough to be her mother, for God's sake. I should go, I stammered, grabbing my purse. "It's late, and I have an early start tomorrow." Disappointment flashed across Autumn's face, quickly replaced by a gentle smile. "Of course. Thank you for coming, Kennedy. It meant a lot to me." As I hurried out of the club, the cool night air did little to calm the turmoil in my mind. I couldn't shake the image of Autumn's lips so close to mine, the feeling of her hand on my knee. What was wrong with me? The next few days passed in a blur of confusion and self-doubt. I threw myself into my work, trying to distract myself from thoughts of Autumn. But every time the bell above the door chimed, my heart leapt, hoping it was her. It wasn't until Friday that she finally appeared, a garment bag slung over her shoulder. "Hey stranger," she said with a shy smile, "I've got another costume that needs your magic touch." I steeled myself, determined to maintain a professional demeanor. "Of course. What seems to be the problem?" As I examined the costume, Autumn chatted about her upcoming performances. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but I couldn't help stealing glances at her. She was wearing a cropped top that revealed a tantalizing strip of midriff, and I found my eyes drawn to the smooth expanse of skin. "Kennedy?" Autumn's voice snapped me out of my reverie. "Is everything okay?" I realized I'd been staring, my hands frozen on the fabric. "Yes, sorry, just thinking about the best way to approach this." A knowing smirk played at the corners of Autumn's mouth. "You know, I meant what I said the other night, about you being gorgeous." My cheeks flamed. "Autumn, please. I'm old enough to be your—" "Don't," she interrupted, stepping closer. "Don't say it. Age is just a number, Kennedy. Can't you feel this connection between us?" I could. God help me, I could. But I shook my head, taking a step back. "It's not right. You're young, you have your whole life ahead of you. You don't want to waste your time with someone like me." Hurt flashed in Autumn's eyes, but she quickly masked it. "I'm not giving up on this, Kennedy, on us. I'll prove to you that what I feel is real." As she left the shop, I sank into my chair, my head in my hands. What had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, did I have the strength to resist the intoxicating pull of Autumn Rivers? That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the memory of Autumn's intense gaze, the way her body moved on stage, the almost kiss at the club. For the first time in years, I felt a stirring of desire deep in my core. As my hand slipped beneath the waistband of my pajamas, I gave in to the fantasies I'd been fighting. Autumn's name a whisper on my lips as I found my release. In the quiet aftermath, shame and longing warred within me. I knew I was stepping onto a dangerous path, but I was powerless to stop it. Autumn Rivers had awakened something in me, and there was no going back. The weeks following my encounter with Autumn were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I threw myself into my work, trying to drown out the constant thoughts of her that plagued my mind. But every time the bell above the shop door chimed, my heart would skip a beat, hoping it was her. More often than not, it wasn't. But Autumn had a way of making her presence felt, even in her absence. She'd started leaving little notes with her costume orders, each one more flirtatious than the last. "Thinking of your magical hands," one read, making me blush to the roots of my graying blonde hair. Another simply said, "You're beautiful when you blush," as if she could see my reaction from wherever she was. I told myself I was being ridiculous. A woman my age getting flustered over notes like a schoolgirl? But I couldn't deny the way my pulse quickened every time I saw her looping handwriting, or the way I'd catch myself smiling at nothing in particular, lost in thoughts of vibrant red hair and mischievous green eyes. One particularly slow afternoon, as I was organizing my fabric swatches, I found myself daydreaming about Autumn. I imagined her lithe body moving gracefully across a stage, the costume I'd made for her hugging every curve. In my mind's eye she turned to face me, a sultry smile playing on her lips as she beckoned me closer. The fantasy Autumn's hands were on my waist, pulling me against her. I could almost feel the heat of her body, smell the intoxicating scent of her perfume. As our lips drew closer, the shop door banged open, startling me out of my reverie. I jerked upright, knocking over a stack of fabric bolts in my haste. "Shit," I muttered, scrambling to pick them up. "Need a hand?" I froze at the sound of that familiar voice. Slowly I looked up to see Autumn standing there, an amused smile on her face. My cheeks burned as I wondered if she could somehow tell what I'd been thinking about. "I've got it," I managed to say, my voice embarrassingly breathy. I stood up, trying to compose myself. "What can I do for you today, Autumn?" She held up a garment bag. "Just another costume alteration. But, honestly, I mostly wanted to see you." My heart did a little flip at her words. "Autumn, we've talked about this." "No, you talked," I listened. "But Kennedy, I can't just turn off what I'm feeling." She stepped closer, and I found myself backing up until I hit the counter behind me. "And I don't think you can either." I swallowed hard, very aware of how close she was. "It's not that simple. I'm old enough to be." "If you say old enough to be my mother one more time, I swear I'll scream," Autumn interrupted, rolling her eyes. "Age is just a number, Kennedy. What matters is how we feel when we're together." Her hand came up to cup my cheek, and I couldn't help but lean into her touch. "And how do you feel?" I whispered, hardly daring to breathe. "Alive," she said simply. "More alive than I've ever felt before." For a moment, I let myself believe it could be that easy, that I could have this vibrant, beautiful young woman in my life, in my bed, but reality came crashing back all too soon. "It wouldn't work," I said, gently removing her hand from my face. "You have your whole life ahead of you, Autumn. Your career is just taking off. You don't need to be tied down to someone like me." Hurt flashed in her eyes, quickly replaced by determination. "You don't get to decide what I need, Kennedy. I'm a grown woman, capable of making my own choices. And I choose you." Before I could respond, she closed the distance between us and pressed her lips to mine. For a split second, I was too shocked to react. Then instinct took over, and I was kissing her back with a passion I didn't know I still possessed. Her lips were soft, tasting faintly of cherry lip balm. Her body pressed against mine, all lean muscle and curves in all the right places. I tangled my hands in her fiery hair, losing myself in the sensation. It was Autumn who finally broke the kiss, both of us panting slightly. "Tell me that didn't feel right," she challenged, her eyes dark with desire. I couldn't. God help me, I couldn't deny the electricity that sparked between us, the way my body sang at her touch. But I also couldn't silence the voice in my head that whispered about scandal, about ruined reputations and broken hearts. "I need time," I said finally, hating the way her face fell. It's a lot to process, Autumn. Please understand." She nodded slowly, taking a step back. "I understand, but I'm not giving up on us, Kennedy. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to see that what we have is special." After she left, I sank into my chair, my fingers tracing my still tingling lips. What was I doing? I was too old for this kind of drama, too set in my ways. And yet, The thought of never kissing Autumn again made my chest ache in a way I hadn't felt in years. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't escape thoughts of Autumn. The way her body had felt pressed against mine, the softness of her lips, the fire in her eyes. My hand slipped beneath the sheets almost of its own accord, seeking out the ache between my thighs. As I brought myself to a shuddering climax, Autumn's name on my lips, I realized I was in far deeper than I'd ever intended to be. This wasn't just some midlife crisis or fleeting fancy. I was falling for Autumn Rivers hard and fast. The question was, did I have the courage to let myself fall? Or would I let fear and societal expectations rob me of what could be the greatest love of my life? As dawn broke over Fort Lauderdale, I was no closer to an answer. But I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The next few weeks were a delicate dance of desire and restraint. Autumn continued to visit my shop, ostensibly for costume alterations, but we both knew the real reason. Each time, the tension between us grew thicker, more palpable. I found myself looking forward to her visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and terrified me. One balmy evening, as I was closing up shop, the bell chimed. I looked up to see Autumn standing in the doorway, backlit by the setting sun. She was a vision in a flowing sundress, her red hair cascading over her shoulders. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her voice low and husky. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "No, I was just finishing up." She sauntered towards me, hips swaying hypnotically. "I have a fitting for that new costume, the one for my solo next month." "Right, of course," I stammered, fumbling with my keys. "Come on back to the fitting room." As I helped Autumn into the costume, a slinky shimmering thing that left little to the imagination, I couldn't help but let my hands linger. Her skin was warm and soft beneath my fingers, and I heard her breath hitch as I smoothed the fabric over her curves. "How does it feel?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Autumn turned to face me, her green eyes dark with desire. "Why don't you tell me?" Before I could stop myself, my hands were on her waist, pulling her closer. She came willingly, her body molding to mine as if we were two pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. "Autumn," I breathed. "We shouldn't." She silenced me with a kiss, fierce and hungry. I responded with equal fervor, years of pent-up passion pouring out of me. My hands roamed her body, reveling in the softness of her skin, the firmness of her dancer's muscles. Autumn's fingers tangled in my hair, tugging gently as she deepened the kiss. I gasped, and she took the opportunity to slip her tongue into my mouth. The taste of her, minty and sweet, made my head spin. We broke apart, both panting heavily. "Kennedy," Autumn murmured, her lips trailing along my jaw. "I want you. I've wanted you for so long." Her words sent a jolt of desire straight to my core. But even as my body screamed for more, a nagging voice in the back of my mind couldn't be silenced. "Wait," I said, gently pushing her back. "Autumn, we need to talk about this." She groaned in frustration but nodded, taking a step back. "Okay, let's talk." I took a deep breath, trying to gather my scattered thoughts. Whatever this is between us, it's complicated. You're so young, and if you say you're old enough to be my mother, I swear to God, Kennedy." Autumn interrupted, rolling her eyes. Despite the tension, I couldn't help but chuckle. "Okay, fair enough. But you have to admit there's a significant age gap here, not to mention I'm your seamstress. There are ethical considerations." Autumn's expression softened. She reached out, taking my hand in hers. "Kennedy, I understand your concerns, but I'm a grown woman, capable of making my own decisions, and I've decided that I want you. Age gap, professional relationship, and all." Her sincerity was almost my undoing. I wanted nothing more than to take her in my arms and kiss her senseless, but I knew we needed to have this conversation. "What about your career?" I asked. "You're just starting to make a name for yourself in the dance world. Being with someone like me, it could complicate things." Autumn's grip on my hand tightened. "My career is important to me, yes, but so are you. I'm not ashamed of how I feel about you, Kennedy. I don't care what anyone else thinks." I sighed, running my free hand through my hair. "It's not that simple, Autumn. People will talk. They'll judge. Are you ready for that kind of scrutiny?" "Are you?" She countered, her gaze intense. "Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You're scared of what people will say, what they'll think. Her words hit home, and I felt a flicker of irritation. Of course I am. I've spent years building a reputation in this town. If word gets out that I'm involved with a client half my age, it could ruin everything. Autumn's eyes flashed with hurt, and I immediately regretted my words. Is that all I am to you, a client? No, I said quickly, reaching for her. No, Autumn, you're so much more than that. God, you're everything. The admission hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. Autumn's expression softened, and she stepped closer, cupping my face in her hands. Then let's figure this out together, she said softly. I'm not asking for a public declaration or anything. We can take it slow, keep things private for now. But Kennedy, I don't want to pretend there's nothing between us anymore. I leaned into her touch, closing my eyes. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to end this now, before we were in too deep. But my heart was singing a different tune. Okay, I whispered, opening my eyes to meet her gaze. Okay, we can try. But Autumn, you have to promise me something. Anything, she said without hesitation. If this gets to be too much, if you decide you want out, you tell me. No hard feelings, no guilt. Your happiness and your career come first, understand? Autumn nodded solemnly. I promise. But Kennedy, you need to promise me something too. What's that? Promise me you'll give us a real chance, that you won't let fear or what other people might think hold you back. I took a deep breath, considering her words. It was a big ask, going against a lifetime of playing it safe, of putting others' expectations before my own desires. But as I looked into Autumn's eyes, seeing the hope and love shining there, I knew my answer. I promise, I said, sealing the vow with a gentle kiss. As we stood there in the dim light of the fitting room, our bodies pressed close, I felt a sense of rightness wash over me. There were still 1,000 reasons why this might not work, 1,000 obstacles we'd have to overcome, but in that moment, with Autumn in my arms, I was ready to face them all. The road ahead would be challenging, no doubt, but for the first time in years I was excited about the future. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of stolen moments and secret smiles. Autumn and I had agreed to take things slow, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a sandcastle. Every touch, every glance, every shared breath was charged with an electricity that threatened to consume us both. One lazy Sunday afternoon, I found myself at my best friend Jake's apartment, nursing a glass of wine and spilling my guts about the whole situation. Jake, a flamboyantly gay interior designer, had been my confidant for years, and I knew if anyone could offer unbiased advice, it would be him. Let me get this straight, Jake said, refilling my glass. You've got a smoking hot redhead half your age practically throwing herself at you, and you're here whining about it. Girl, what is wrong with you? I sighed, taking a hefty swig of wine. It's not that simple, Jake. There's the age difference, my business reputation to consider, not to mention. Oh, honey, Jake interrupted, rolling his eyes dramatically. Cut the crap. You're not worried about your reputation. You're scared. His words hit me like a slap in the face. Excuse me? Jake leaned forward, his expression softening. Kennedy, sweetie, I've known you for 20 years now. In all that time, I've never seen you take a real risk, especially not with your heart. You're comfortable in your little bubble, and this girl is threatening to pop it. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. He wasn't wrong. But what if it all goes wrong, I whispered, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at me. What if I let her in, and she realizes I'm too old, too set in my ways? What if I'm not enough for her? Jake reached out, taking my hand in his. And what if it all goes right? What if this is your chance at real, passionate love? Are you really willing to let that slip away because you're afraid? His words echoed in my mind as I made my way home that evening. The sun was setting over Fort Lauderdale, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. As I turned onto my street, I saw a familiar figure sitting on my porch steps. Autumn stood as I approached, her face lighting up with a smile that made my heart skip a beat. Hey, she said softly, I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced. I needed to see you. In that moment, looking at her bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, all my fears and doubts seemed to melt away. Jake was right, I was scared, but I was also tired of letting fear dictate my life. Without a word, I closed the distance between us, pulling Autumn into a fierce kiss. She made a small sound of surprise before melting into my embrace, her arms winding around my neck. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, Autumn looked at me with wide eyes. "Wow," she whispered. "What brought that on?" I smiled, running my fingers through her silky red hair. "I'm done being afraid," I said simply. "I want this. I want you, Autumn." Her answering smile was radiant. "Thank God," she breathed, pulling me in for another kiss. We stumbled through my front door, hands roaming, lips never parting for more than a moment. Clothes were shed in a frantic trail leading to my bedroom. When Autumn's back hit the mattress, she pulled me down with her, our bodies fitting together like puzzle pieces. As we lay tangled together in the afterglow, Autumn's head resting on my chest, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This wasn't just lust or some midlife crisis. This was real and deep and terrifying in its intensity. "What are you thinking?" Autumn murmured, tracing lazy patterns on my skin. I pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm thinking that I'm falling in love with you," I admitted softly. "And that scares the hell out of me." Autumn propped herself up on an elbow, her green eyes searching mine. "It scares me too," she confessed. "But Kennedy, being with you, it feels right. Like this is where I'm meant to be." I pulled her down for a tender kiss, pouring all the emotions I couldn't yet verbalize into it. When we parted, Autumn snuggled back into my side with a contented sigh. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized that for the first time in years, I was excited about the future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. And that was worth any risk. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of soft humming. I padded into the kitchen to find Autumn at the stove, wearing nothing but my oversized t-shirt, her red hair a messy halo around her face. She turned and smiled at me, and in that moment, I knew. This was it. This was what I'd been waiting for all my life. "Good morning, beautiful," Autumn said, offering me a steaming mug. I took the coffee, set it aside, and pulled her into my arms. "Good morning," I murmured against her lips, ready to face the world together. Her answering kiss was all the response I needed. As the weeks turned into months, Autumn and I settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Our relationship blossomed in the quiet moments, shared cups of coffee in the morning, stolen kisses in the fitting room of my shop, lazy Sundays spent tangled in bed sheets. But as our love grew stronger, so did the challenges we faced. It was a balmy Friday evening when the first real test of our relationship came. I was closing up shop, lost in thoughts of the romantic dinner Autumn had promised to cook, when the bell above the door chimed. "We're close." The words died on my lips as I turned to see my parents standing there, their faces a mix of concern and disappointment. "Kennedy," my mother said, her voice tight. "We need to talk." My heart sank as I realized what this was about. Despite our attempts at discretion, word of my relationship with Autumn had spread through our small community like wildfire. "Mom, Dad," I started, but my father cut me off. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Are you really involved with that young dancer? What's her name, Autumn?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Yes," I said firmly. "Autumn and I are together. We're in love." The look of disgust that flashed across my mother's face felt like a physical blow. "Kennedy, this is unacceptable. She's half your age. What will people think?" "I don't care what people think," I retorted, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. "Autumn makes me happy, happier than I've been in years." My father shook his head, his expression a mix of anger and disappointment. "This isn't you, Kennedy. You've always been so sensible. What's gotten into you?" "Love," I said simply. "Dad, I know this is hard for you to understand, but—" "Hard to understand?" he scoffed. "It's impossible to understand. You're throwing away your reputation, your business, everything you've worked for. And for what? Some fleeting fling with a girl young enough to be your daughter?" His words stung, but I held my ground. "It's not a fling. Autumn and I are committed to each other, and my business is doing fine, thank you very much." My mother stepped forward, her face softening slightly. "Honey, we're just worried about you. This relationship, it can't last. You must see that. When she leaves you for someone her own age, you'll be left with nothing but a broken heart and a ruined reputation." I felt a flare of anger at her words. "You don't know Autumn. You haven't even given her a chance. She's kind and talented, and she loves me for who I am. Why can't that be enough for you?" Because it's not natural, my father exploded. It's perverse, Kennedy. I didn't raise you to be like this. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and painful. I blinked back, tears, my voice shaking as I spoke. I think you should leave now. Kennedy, please, my mother pleaded. We're your family. We just want what's best for you. I shook my head, moving towards the door. If you can't accept Autumn, if you can't be happy that I found love, then maybe you're not the family I thought you were. As I ushered them out, my father turned to me one last time. This isn't over, Kennedy. You'll see reason eventually. The sound of the door closing behind them felt like the end of something I couldn't quite name. I sank to the floor, tears flowing freely now. That's how Autumn found me an hour later, curled up against the counter, my eyes red and puffy. Kennedy? She gasped, rushing to my side. Sweetheart, what happened? Through hiccuping sobs, I recounted the confrontation with my parents. Autumn listened silently, her arms wrapped tightly around me, her presence a balm to my wounded soul. When I finished, she cupped my face in her hands, her green eyes fierce with determination. Listen to me, Kennedy Blake. I love you. Nothing your parents or anyone else says can change that. We're in this together, okay? I nodded, managing a watery smile. I love you too, I whispered. God, Autumn, I love you so much it scares me sometimes. She kissed me then, soft and sweet, pouring all her love and support into the gesture. When we parted, she stood, pulling me to my feet. Come on, she said. Let's go home. I still owe you dinner, remember? As we walked hand in hand back to my place, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Yes, we had challenges ahead. Yes, there would be people who didn't understand or approve of our relationship, but with Autumn by my side, I felt like I could face anything. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. Word of my confrontation with my parents spread quickly, and I found myself on the receiving end of judgmental looks and whispered gossip whenever I ventured into town. But for every disapproving glare, there was also a supportive smile, or a kind word from those who saw the happiness Autumn brought into my life. Autumn, for her part, was a rock. She never wavered in her commitment to me, even when the gossip started to affect her dance career. Some of the more conservative patrons of the arts in Fort Lauderdale were reluctant to support a dancer involved in such a scandalous relationship. But Autumn took it all in stride, throwing herself into her performances with even more passion and dedication. One evening, as we cuddled on the couch watching an old movie, Autumn turned to me with a serious expression. Kennedy, she said softly, I want you to know that I'm all in, no matter what anyone says or thinks. I'm here for the long haul. I felt my heart swell with emotion. Are you sure? I asked, hating the note of insecurity in my voice. You're so young, Autumn. You have your whole life ahead of you. I don't want you to feel tied down or miss out on anything because of me. Autumn silenced me with a kiss, then pulled back to look me in the eyes. You're not tying me down, Kennedy. You're setting me free, free to be myself, to love without fear or shame. You're everything I want, everything I need. Got it? I nodded, blinking back happy tears. Got it, I whispered, pulling her in for another kiss. As we lost ourselves in each other, I marveled at the journey that had brought us to this point. From that first frantic costume repair to this moment of quiet intimacy, every step had led us here. And despite the challenges we faced, despite the disapproval and the gossip, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. With Autumn in my arms, I was home. As summer faded into autumn, our relationship continued to blossom despite the challenges we faced. However, even the strongest love isn't immune to the occasional bout of insecurity and jealousy. For me, that moment came during one of Autumn's performances at the local theater. I sat in the front row, my heart swelling with pride as Autumn took center stage. She was breathtaking, her lithe body moving with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. But as the performance progressed, I found my attention drawn to Autumn's dance partner, a devastatingly handsome young man named Derek. The way Derek's hands moved over Autumn's body, the intimacy of their movements, it all felt a little too real. I tried to remind myself that it was just a performance, that the passion I was seeing was choreographed, but a nagging voice in the back of my mind wouldn't be silenced. After the show, I waited for Autumn outside her dressing room, a bouquet of roses clutched in my sweaty palms. When she emerged, her face flushed with exertion and triumph, my heart skipped a beat. God, she was beautiful. Kennedy, she exclaimed, throwing her arms around me. Did you like the show? I forced a smile, handing her the roses. You were amazing, as always. Before Autumn could respond, Derek appeared in the doorway, his chiseled features breaking into a grin. Hey Autumn, great job out there. We really nailed that lift in the second act. I watched as Autumn's face lit up, her hand resting casually on Derek's arm as they chatted about the performance. The easy familiarity between them made my stomach churn. Oh, Derek, this is Kennedy, Autumn said, finally remembering my presence. My girlfriend. Derek's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he quickly recovered, extending his hand. Nice to meet you, Kennedy. Autumn's told me so much about you. I shook his hand, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Funny, she hasn't mentioned you at all. Autumn shot me a confused look, but before she could say anything, Derek excused himself, leaving us alone in the hallway. What was that about? Autumn asked as we made our way to the car. I shrugged, not trusting myself to speak. The drive home was tense, filled with an uncomfortable silence that felt alien after months of easy companionship. It wasn't until we were back at my place that Autumn finally confronted me. Okay, spill it. What's going on with you tonight? I busied myself in the kitchen, avoiding her gaze. Nothing, I'm fine. Bullshit, Autumn said, her voice uncharacteristically sharp. You've been acting weird ever since the show ended. Is this about Derek? The sound of his name on her lips was like a match to gasoline. All my insecurities came rushing to the surface. Maybe it is, I snapped. You two seemed awfully cozy back there. Autumn's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you serious right now? Kennedy, he's my dance partner. Of course we're close. It's part of the job. Part of the job, I echoed bitterly. Is that what you tell yourself when his hands are all over you? The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Hurt flashed across Autumn's face, quickly replaced by anger. How dare you, she hissed. You know how much dance means to me. How could you cheapen it like that? I deflated, the fight draining out of me. I'm sorry, I whispered. Seeing you with him, someone so young and talented, it made me wonder what the hell you're doing with someone like me. Autumn's expression softened. She crossed the kitchen, taking my face in her hands. Kennedy, listen to me. There is nothing, absolutely nothing between me and Derek, or anyone else for that matter. You're the one I want. Only you. I leaned into her touch, feeling foolish. I know, God, I'm sorry, sometimes I can't believe this is real, that you'd choose me over all the young, beautiful people throwing themselves at you. Autumn smiled, a mischievous glint in her eye. Well, maybe I need to remind you just how real this is. Before I could respond, she was kissing me, hard and passionate. I gasped as she backed me against the counter, her hands roaming my body with a possessiveness that made me weak in the knees. We barely made it to the bedroom, leaving a trail of discarded clothes in our wake. Autumn pushed me onto the bed, straddling my hips with a predatory grin. Watch me, she commanded, slowly peeling off her red lace bra. See how much I want you, Kennedy. Only you. What followed was a night of passionate lovemaking unlike anything we'd experienced before. Autumn seemed determined to erase every doubt, every insecurity from my mind. She worshipped my body with her hands and mouth, drawing gasps and moans from me that I didn't even know I was capable of making. When we finally collapsed, sweaty and sated, Autumn pulled me close, her lips brushing my ear. I love you, Kennedy Blake. You're everything to me. Don't you ever forget that. I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As we drifted off to sleep, tangled in each other's arms, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Yes, our relationship had its challenges. Yes, there would always be people younger and more conventionally attractive than me, but Autumn had chosen me, and I was done questioning that choice. The next morning I woke to find Autumn watching me, a soft smile on her face. Good morning, beautiful, she murmured, leaning in for a kiss. As we lay there trading lazy kisses and gentle caresses, I knew I had to address the elephant in the room. Autumn, I said softly, I'm sorry about last night. My behavior was inexcusable. She propped herself up on an elbow, her expression serious. You're right, it was. Kennedy, you have to trust me. Trust us. I've never given you any reason to doubt my feelings for you. I nodded, shame coloring my cheeks. I know, it's not you I doubt, it's me. Sometimes I look at you and I can't believe you're real, that you'd want to be with someone like me. Autumn's eyes softened. She took my hand, placing it over her heart. Feel that? It beats for you, Kennedy. Only you. I don't care about age or what anyone else thinks. You're the one I want to build a life with. Tears pricked at my eyes as I pulled her in for a kiss. I love you, I whispered against her lips. God, I love you so much. As we made love again, slower and more tender this time, I felt something shift inside me. The last vestiges of my insecurity melted away, replaced by a bone-deep certainty. This was real. This was forever. Later that day, as we shared a late breakfast, Autumn suddenly looked up from her coffee with a grin. You know, she said, I think it's time you came to one of my rehearsals. See for yourself, the Derek is about as threatening as a puppy. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. You're on, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. And Autumn, thank you. For loving me, insecurities and all? Her answering smile was radiant. Always, she said simply. As we finished our breakfast planning our day ahead, I marveled at how far we'd come. From that first frantic costume repair to this moment of domestic bliss, every step had brought us closer together, and I knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them side by side. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn when Autumn burst into my shop, her face flushed with excitement. Kennedy, she exclaimed, practically vibrating with energy. I got it. I got the lead in the winter showcase. My heart swelled with pride as I pulled her into a tight embrace. That's amazing, love. I knew you could do it. As Autumn chattered away about the performance, an idea began to form in my mind. This was her moment, her chance to truly shine on the big stage, and I wanted to be a part of it in a way that went beyond just sitting in the audience. Autumn, I interrupted gently. What would you say if I offered to design your costume for the showcase? Her eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across her face. Kennedy, are you serious? That would be incredible. And so began a labor of love unlike anything I'd ever undertaken before. I poured my heart and soul into every stitch, every sequin, every carefully placed crystal. The costume would be a testament to our love story, delicate yet strong, traditional yet daring, a perfect blend of my classic style and Autumn's youthful energy. As the weeks passed, I worked tirelessly on the costume, often late into the night. Autumn would find me hunched over my sewing machine, bleary-eyed but determined. She'd gently pry me away, leading me to bed with whispered words of love and appreciation. Finally, just days before the showcase, it was ready. I stood back, surveying my creation with a critical eye as Autumn slipped it on for the final fitting. Oh, Kennedy, she breathed, twirling in front of the mirror. It's perfect. And it was. The costume hugged her curves in all the right places, the delicate beadwork catching the light with every movement. But more than that, it was a physical representation of our love, beautiful, unique, and stronger than either of us alone. The night of the showcase arrived, and I found myself in the front row, my heart pounding with anticipation. As the lights dimmed and the music swelled, Autumn took center stage. The audience gasped audibly at the sight of her costume, but I barely noticed. I was too captivated by the woman wearing it. Autumn danced with a passion and grace that took my breath away. Every move, every gesture told our story, the initial spark of attraction, the hesitation, the moment we finally gave in to our feelings. As she reached the climax of her performance, tears streamed down my face. This wasn't just a dance. It was a love letter, written in movement and music. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of stunned silence before the theater erupted in thunderous applause. Autumn stood center stage, chest heaving, her eyes locked on mine. In that moment, I saw our entire future reflected in her gaze. A lifetime of love, laughter, and unwavering support. As the audience rose to their feet for a standing ovation, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find my parents standing there, their faces a mix of emotions. Kennedy, my mother said softly. We were wrong. Seeing Autumn up there, seeing the way you look at each other, it's clear how much you love each other. My father nodded, his eyes suspiciously moist. That costume, did you make it? When I nodded, he smiled. It's beautiful, sweetheart. You found your muse. Before I could respond, Autumn came bounding down from the stage, still in her costume. She threw herself into my arms, laughing and crying all at once. We did it, Kennedy. We really did it. As I held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair mingled with stage makeup, I felt a sense of completeness I'd never experienced before. This was it. This was what true love felt like. My parents watched us with soft smiles, any lingering disapproval melting away in the face of our obvious happiness. Autumn, my mother said, we owe you an apology. And, we'd love to get to know you better if you're willing. Autumn's smile could have lit up the entire theater. I'd like that very much, she said, reaching out to squeeze my mother's hand. As we made our way out of the theater, surrounded by well-wishers and admirers of Autumn's performance and my costume, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. We'd faced every challenge thrown our way, age differences, societal disapproval, my own insecurities, and come out stronger for it. Later that night, as we lay tangled together in bed, Autumn propped herself up on an elbow, her green eyes sparkling in the moonlight. You know, she said softly, I've been thinking. Dangerous pastime, I teased, earning a playful swat. I'm serious, she laughed. I've been thinking. What would you say to combining our talents, your designs, my choreography? We could create something truly magical together. I felt my heart swell with love and excitement. Autumn Rivers Blake, I said solemnly, are you proposing a business partnership or a lifelong commitment? Her smile was radiant as she leaned in close, her lips brushing mine as she whispered, both. As we sealed our agreement with a passionate kiss, I marveled at the journey that had brought us to this point. From that first frantic costume repair to this moment of perfect understanding, every step had led us here, and I knew with absolute certainty that the best was yet to come. Our love story, like the costume I'd created, was a beautiful blend of the traditional and the daring, the classic and the contemporary. It was uniquely ours, and it was perfect. As dawn broke over Fort Lauderdale, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Autumn and I stood on the balcony, her head resting on my shoulder. What do you think the future holds for us? She asked softly. I smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. I don't know, I admitted, but as long as we're facing it together I can't wait to find out. And as the sun rose on a new day, full of promise and possibility, I knew that our greatest adventure was just beginning.